Our next guest is one of the top automotive repair shops in our community. And again, an honor and a privilege to introduce businesses like this to our community with integrity and core fundamental values that you can count on. Our next guest, Rob McMullen with RPM Automotive. Rob, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
You know, we talked a little bit about this. I think one of the most common misconceptions in today's consumers is that today's more modern cars do not require tune-ups.
That is a big misconception. A lot of the newest vehicles out today can go up to 100,000 miles without needing a tune-up. But any combustion engine, Mitch, at some point it's going to need a tune-up. And the older engines required more parts to do a tune-up because they had older systems and things such as spark plug wires, distributor caps, rotors, and the old ignition systems. The newer vehicles today don't have, a lot of them don't even have a distributor. They run coil over plug or a single coil pack and short plug wires to each plug. And so they do need to be replaced at an interval that's recommended by the manufacturer.
Well, and this is probably really confusing for a lot of people that have been driving cars for 30, 40 years to have transferred into the technologies, and maybe their last car didn't have the coil over plugs. And so it's got to be a lot for them to keep up with, and we're going to talk in a minute about what you have in place to help them not have to worry about that. When should tune-ups be done?
You know, that's by manufacturer, Mitch. Some of them are as soon as 30,000 miles. Some of them go as far out as 100,000 miles. So it's really important that you either check your owner's manual or call a reputable shop, and we'll have that information available, and we can let you know when that tune-up is due.
Do you find that people confuse that they go out and have an oil change if they feel that they had their car tuned up?
It's funny you bring that up, Mitch. My wife used to ask me every time before we went on a road trip, are you going to tune the car up before we go? And I'd get a big question in my mind. It's like, tune the car up? And she says, yeah, change the oil. And I says, honey, that's not a tune-up. So we need to keep that in mind.
Well, I'm sure there's some men out there that have made that same mistake. Let's talk about, at the time of a scheduled tune-up, some of these parts that you'll go through, and specifically as well, if they're not done at the proper intervals, what kind of potential problems can arise out of them? And let's start with the top on your list here today, the spark plugs.
If spark plugs aren't changed when they should be, in most cases they'll live a little bit longer than the manufacturer recommended interval. But at that point, you start losing power, decreasing your fuel economy. You might even pick up misfires, or the car might start bucking, making kinds of feelings that, those kinds of problems. Turn on a check engine light. So it is important that it's replaced at its interval.
And the wires and boots for those, this is, I think, one of those same things that people think, I just changed my plugs. Should these be done at every time you do your plugs, the boots and the wires?
They absolutely should. The heat that's built up in the engine compartment degrades the plug wires and the boots over time. And our recommendation is that, when you're doing a major tune-up, you should replace the boots or the wires at the time you replace the spark plugs.
I can't imagine you just put fresh plugs in and then you take the potential that power is not even being transferred to the plug itself through a defective or worn wire.
Yeah, we had a customer last week that came in the shop and said, hey, my car was misfiring. I changed my smart plugs and it's still misfiring. We got in and determined what cylinder was misfiring. We went in, he had a bad plug or a bad plug boot. And so, yeah, that's what transfers the power from the coil to the spark plug. And if he'd have changed the boots at the time that he did the spark plug, he wouldn't have come in to see us.
Perfect. And distributor caps and rotors.
That's, old technology for us in the industry today, but there are still a ton of cars out there that are running distributor ignitions. And those do need to be replaced at the manufactured recommended intervals. And same thing can happen if those don't get replaced at the time of a tune-up. You get the misfires, you get the poor fuel economy, everything that goes along with not taking care of your car properly.
And these, by the expansion and contraction of hot and cold, and our climate has the two extremes, boiling hot summers and freezing cold winters. These can crack.
Yeah, absolutely, and they build up electrolysis inside. Just every time it goes around, it creates a high voltage spark, and that spark will transfer contamination. And when that happens, then they can actually crossfire and fire the wrong cylinder.
And fuel filters. I think this is really a common overlooked service. People know about their air filters. They know about their oil filters. But fuel filters, I think, is this the most neglected filter on the car, you think?
It's probably close to it. Maybe the transmission might be the closest to it. But again, not all new cars have fuel filters. Some old cars don't have replaceable fuel filters, short of taking the fuel tank out, and that's pretty cost prohibitive to do that. But the ones that do have replaceable filters, they should be changed when the manufacturer recommends, and that's usually at the time of a major tune-up.
I heard some of these Ford diesel trucks have two of them.
Absolutely. They're running a lot of fuel through those big engines, and, we recommend on those, just from experience, changing those filters on the diesel engines every 15,000 miles. We have a fleet with over 60 diesel trucks, and they were losing injectors, losing injector pumps, all kinds of fuel system problems because they didn't have a preventative maintenance program in place to change their fuel filters. Once we got that program in place for that fleet, we cut those repairs down to almost nothing.
Well, and you just said it. Some of these services that are neglected, they're peanuts in percentage of what it costs if they're neglected to actually repair the failures caused by them. Air filters.
Again, people think it should last forever. Look out your window any day in this town, and especially in the afternoon, how much dust is flying around the air here. Those filters need to be replaced, and the best way to really know when they need to be replaced is to actually pull it out and inspect it.
And the PCV valve, I can say that there's probably 90% of our listeners right now that don't even know what the PCV stands for or does.
It's a positive crankcase ventilation system. Every combustion engine builds up gases inside of that engine, and back in the old days, they used to dump those gases out into the atmosphere. Well, for emissions purposes, obviously, we can't have that anymore. So the positive crankcase ventilation system recirculates that gas and actually reburns that. And if the valve that controls that either sticks closed or sticks wide open, can cause some pretty serious problems.
What happens if people go out and they buy the least expensive or an inferior part, is what I'd like to call that, or the incorrect parts are used on some of these items?
One of the most important things I have to stress is use what the manufacturer recommends. There are a lot of different spark plugs out there, and you see, while you're watching a race on TV, and there's all these high-performance spark plugs, and if you're not driving a race car, you don't need those spark plugs. Not using the factory recommended plug can actually cause problems. You can take a plug that doesn't belong in that vehicle. Now, it may cross over, the part number may cross over for your local parts house, but you put that spark plug in, and there are minor differences in the resistance in the spark plugs, and that can actually foul up the whole ignition system and cause the car not to run proper.
Oh, and I believe that's one of the reasons why we endorse businesses like yours, is you would only use the proper components when you're doing these repairs in the first place.
Absolutely, yeah.
What else at the time of tune-up should be done to help keep a car running its best? I really enjoyed the conversation we had on this one, the fuel injection systems and the upper intakes. I'll let you share about those.
As you're burning fuel, obviously it's building carbon up inside the engine. The better or the higher quality gasoline you purchase, the less the deposits. But most of us don't always go to, the highest quality gas station. And so over time, those carbon deposits will build up inside the vehicle, inside the engine, and actually start slowing down the combustion process. And so we recommend to actually have the fuel injection system cleaned or do an upper intake system cleaning, which cleans the valves and the top of the piston and gets that stuff burned out and cleaned out of the engine to increase the performance and fuel economy.
Well, and I promised to mention this part as well before we close here, is how you can be assured that you're getting these services done when they're due. and you have a system in place to make it seamless for the consumer.
We do. We have a business management system. Once you come into the shop, we'll set you up as a customer, and once that vehicle is entered into our system, it will send you an email or a text message as to when your next service is due, whether it be a tune-up or an oil change or a transmission service, differentials, any preventative maintenance type services, our system will send you a message.
And you spend money to make sure your customer is informed, that they have that information, and knowledge is power. That's Rob McMullen with RPM Automotive. And how do they get a hold of you there, Rob?
Mitch, we're at 1510 Glendale Avenue in Sparks. You can call the shop at 359-0840 or visit our website at rpmautomotiveinc.com.
That's Rob McMullen again with RPM Automotive, one of our finest local businesses that we endorse at the Car Buyer Advisor.